In the grim darkness of the far future, courage is not optional. It is mandated by law, enforced by commissars, and measured in the willingness to die for the Emperor. Yet even in humanity's darkest hour, when the very survival of the species hangs by threads of faith and fury, there are those who falter, there are those who break, there are those who run. The Astra Militarum knows what to do with cowards. A single bolt round to the back of the skull has served the Imperial Guard for 10,000 years, swift and final justice for those who would abandon their post. The Commissariat exists precisely for this purpose, to ensure that fear of the enemy never exceeds fear of one's own officers. It is a simple equation, as elegant as it is brutal. Death before dishonor, death before desertion, death, always death. But death, it seems, is sometimes too merciful. In the outer reaches of the segmentum solar, beyond the major shipping lanes and the watchful eyes of the Adeptus Terra, there exists a moon that does not appear on any star chart. Its name has been struck from imperial records, its location classified beyond the reach of all but the highest echelons of the Departamento Munitorum. Here, where the void is cold and the stars are distant pinpricks of unforgiving light, stands a facility that challenges the very foundations of imperial justice. This is Perdition's Gate, though that name too exists only in whispered conversations between high-ranking officers who have signed their souls away in blood-sealed oaths of secrecy. To the galaxy at large, it simply does not exist. To those who know of it, it represents something far worse than execution. It represents hope perverted into the cruelest of punishments. The moon itself is unremarkable, a barren sphere of grey regolith and ancient impact craters that has never known the touch of atmosphere or the blessing of life. Its surface temperature hovers at absolute zero, and its gravity pulls with the weak grip of a dying world. But beneath that lifeless crust, buried deep within reinforced tunnels that stretch for hundreds of kilometers, lies a complex that defies both reason and mercy. Here, desertion is not answered with death. Here, cowardice finds its redemption through an eternity of simulated warfare that knows no victory, no defeat, and most importantly, no end. The facility was born from the twisted genius of a man whose name has been lost to history, though his legacy endures in every corridor and every chamber of Perdition's Gate. He was, according to fragmented records, a former colonel of the Cadian shock troops who had witnessed too many good soldiers die for the sins of the few. Where others saw weakness requiring execution, he saw potential requiring refinement. Where others demanded the finality of death, he offered the possibility of eternal service. His proposal, submitted through channels so classified that even their existence is theoretical, was simple in its audacity. Rather than waste the lives of trained soldiers who had simply lost their nerve, why not give them the opportunity to find it again? Rather than execute them for a moment of weakness, why not provide them with unlimited opportunities to prove their courage? The logic was as seductive as it was horrifying. The Departamento Munitorum, ever eager to maximize the utility of every imperial resource, approved the project with the kind of cold enthusiasm reserved for weapons testing and mass conscription drives. What followed was the construction of a facility that would have impressed even the Dark Mechanicus, with its blend of advanced technology and refined cruelty. The exterior of Perdition's Gate resembles nothing so much as a military depot, all reinforced blast doors and sensor arrays designed to discourage casual investigation. The few supply ships that dock here do so under orders that brook no curiosity and permit no questions. Their crews know only that they are delivering standard military supplies to a facility that officially does not exist, for purposes that officially have no purpose. But it is beneath the surface that the true horror of the place reveals itself. The upper levels house administrative offices and quarters for the facility's permanent staff, men and women who have volunteered for assignments that will never appear on their service records. They are the keepers of a secret that the Imperium would rather forget, the architects of a justice that transcends death itself. Below them, connected by corridors that seem to stretch into infinity, lie the simulation chambers. Each one is a perfect sphere, 30 meters in diameter, constructed from materials that can withstand the fury of las fire, the concussion of grenades, and the desperate clawing of men who have realized the true nature of their sentence. The walls are lined with hollow projectors of such sophistication that they make the training facilities of the Schola Progenium seem crude by comparison. Within these chambers, reality becomes negotiable. Forests of Katashan can spring into existence with the press of a button, complete with the smell of rotting vegetation and the distant roar of unseen predators. The bombed-out ruins of Cadia can be recreated down to the last broken piece of rockcrete, the acrid smoke of a dying world hanging heavy in recycled air. The ice wastes of Valhalla stretch to artificial horizons, the wind howling with a fury that exists only in digital memory. But these are not training simulations designed to educate and improve. They are prisons designed to contain and torment. Each environment is calibrated to produce the maximum psychological pressure, to push its occupants to the very edge of sanity, and then hold them there, suspended between courage and madness, for as long as their bodies can endure. The first residents of Perdition's Gate arrived in the facility's third year of operation, transported in unmarked ships from theaters of war across the galaxy. They came in small groups, never more than a dozen at a time, each one carefully selected for their crimes against the Imperial war effort. Some had fled in the face of orc charges, abandoning their positions and leaving gaps in the line that cost hundreds of lives. Others had refused orders to advance across killing fields that would have claimed their entire squad. A few had simply frozen when faced with the roar of enemy artillery, their minds overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the carnage they were expected to embrace. In the old days, each of these men would have been granted the mercy of a quick death, their failures erased by the finality of execution. But Perdition's Gate offered something different, something that the architects of the facility claimed was superior to mere death. It offered the chance to fight the same battle over and over again, to face their fears repeatedly until they conquered them or were conquered by them. The process begins in what the facility staff euphemistically calls the orientation chamber, a sterile white room where new arrivals receive their final briefing. They are told that they have been selected for a special program, one that will give them the opportunity to redeem themselves in the eyes of the Emperor. They are informed that their sentences are indefinite, that they will remain in the facility until they have proven their worth through acts of valor that eclipse their previous failures. What they are not told is that the simulations are designed to be unwinnable. What they are not told is that every act of courage will be met with an escalation in difficulty that ensures failure remains inevitable. What they are not told is that redemption is not the goal of this place, but rather a carrot dangled eternally beyond reach. The psychological profiles of the facility's residents make for disturbing reading. In the early days, many believed that they were genuinely being given a second chance, that their courage in the simulations would eventually earn them release and reinstatement. They threw themselves into battle with the desperate enthusiasm of the truly repentant, fighting virtual enemies with a ferocity that would have made their former commissars proud. But as the months passed and no release came, as their victories were ignored and their defeats punished with longer simulation cycles, the truth began to dawn. They were not being rehabilitated. They were being stored, kept in a state of perpetual warfare that served no purpose beyond the satisfaction of those who had designed their fate. The facility's medical wing is equipped with the finest life support technology that the Adeptus Mechanicus can provide, for the bodies of the residents must be maintained even as their minds are systematically broken. Intravenous feeding tubes ensure that malnutrition never claims them. Muscle stimulators prevent atrophy during the long periods when they are confined to their simulation pods. Neural inhibitors suppress the kind of psychological trauma that might lead to complete mental collapse, for a completely broken mind serves no purpose in this carefully calibrated hell. Sleep is regulated by chemical injections that ensure exactly 4 hours of rest per day, enough to prevent total exhaustion but insufficient for true recovery. Dreams are monitored and, when necessary, edited to ensure that even in unconsciousness, the residents find no peace. Some report dreaming of their families, only to watch them die in the same battles that claimed their courage. Others dream of home worlds that no longer exist, reduced to ash by the very enemies they once fled. The simulations themselves are marvels of technological achievement, each one a perfect recreation of some pivotal moment in imperial military history. The Siege of Terra unfolds with photographic accuracy, the traitor legions advancing across the palace walls, while loyalist defenders fight with the desperate fury of the doomed. The Battle of Macragge is rendered in such detail that the screams of dying ultramarines echo with authentic anguish through speakers that vibrate with subharmonic frequencies designed to induce primal terror. But it is the personal touches that truly demonstrate the cruelty of the place. Each simulation is tailored to the specific psychological profile of its occupant, designed to exploit their particular fears and weaknesses with surgical precision. A man who fled from tyranid bioforms finds himself eternally trapped in hive ship corridors, the chittering of approaching hormagaunts growing ever closer. A woman who broke under orbital bombardment faces endless barrages that shake the ground beneath her feet and fill the air with the screaming of the damned. The facility operates on a cycle that has remained unchanged for over a century. Each day begins with a mandatory period of physical conditioning, not to improve fitness, but to ensure that the body remains capable of experiencing the full range of sensations that the simulations provide. Pain receptors are calibrated to precise sensitivity levels. Adrenaline responses are chemically enhanced to ensure maximum psychological impact. Even the sense of smell is regulated, for the architects of this place understand that the stench of cordite and blood can break a man's spirit more effectively than any whip. Following the conditioning period comes the pre-simulation briefing, delivered by automated servitors whose mechanical voices carry just enough human inflection to remind the residents of what they have lost. The mission parameters are always the same, impossibly difficult objectives that require acts of heroism beyond the capacity of any mortal man. Hold the line against infinite enemies. Rescue civilians from certain death. Achieve victory where victory is mathematically impossible. The simulations themselves last between 8 and 12 hours, depending on how quickly the participant fails or how long they can maintain the illusion of progress. Some men last mere minutes before their nerve breaks and they attempt to flee, only to discover that the simulation has no boundaries, that the battlefield extends infinitely in all directions. Others fight with such determination that the program must actively intervene to ensure their defeat, sending wave after wave of enemies until even the most stalwart defender is overwhelmed. Between simulations comes a period euphemistically called reflection time, though reflection implies a level of rational thought that most residents have long since abandoned. They are returned to their cells, bare chambers that contain only a cot, a waste receptacle, and a small viewport that looks out onto the surface of the dead moon. Here they are left alone with their thoughts, which by this point in their imprisonment have become their own worst enemy. Some spend this time in prayer, reciting the catechisms of the Imperial Creed, with the mechanical repetition of broken minds seeking comfort in familiar words. Others rage against their captors, screaming obscenities and threats that echo through corridors where no one is listening. A few simply stare at the walls, their minds having retreated so far into themselves that they no longer acknowledge the external world. The facility's staff maintains detailed records of each resident's psychological deterioration, charting the progression from hope to despair with the clinical detachment of researchers studying plague vectors. They note when the first signs of dissociation appear, usually within the 3rd month of imprisonment. They document the onset of auditory hallucinations, typically manifesting as the voices of dead comrades offering encouragement or condemnation. They record the exact moment when each resident realizes the true nature of their situation, the precise instant when the last vestige of hope dies and is replaced by something far more dangerous. For it is in this moment of absolute despair that some residents discover a kind of twisted enlightenment. They realize that if their punishment is to fight forever, then they must find meaning not in victory but in the act of fighting itself. They begin to approach each simulation not as a test to be passed, but as a ritual to be performed, a daily offering of suffering to gods who have long since stopped listening. These men and women become the facility's most disturbing success stories, for they have achieved a state that the original architects never intended. They have found peace in perpetual war, comfort in endless defeat. They enter each simulation with the calm certainty of those who have accepted their fate completely, fighting with a mechanical precision that serves no purpose beyond the prevention of absolute madness. The facility's archives contain recordings of these transformed residents, their voices flat and emotionless as they request permission to enter their next simulation. They speak of their virtual battles as though they were real, describing the tactical advantages of positions that exist only in digital memory and mourning comrades who never lived. They have created their own reality within the confines of their electronic prison, a reality where their failures have meaning and their suffering serves some greater purpose. But even these adaptations cannot mask the fundamental horror of what Perdition's Gate represents. It is a place where mercy has been perverted into cruelty, where second chances have become eternal damnation. The men and women imprisoned here are neither alive nor dead, but something in between, suspended in a state that denies them both the peace of the grave and the possibility of redemption. The facility's power requirements are enormous, fed by fusion reactors that burn with the light of artificial suns buried deep within the moon's core. The energy needed to maintain the simulations, to keep the life support systems running, to power the medical equipment that preserves the residents' bodies while destroying their minds, could supply a hive city for decades. It is a staggering waste of resources in an imperium that can spare nothing, a monument to the kind of institutional cruelty that thrives in the shadows of bureaucracy. Yet Perdition's Gate continues to operate, its existence justified by reports that never reach the public and statistics that exist only in the most classified archives of the Departamento Munitorum. The facility processes approximately 50 new residents per year, a number carefully calculated to ensure that the simulation chambers never sit empty while avoiding the kind of large-scale transfers that might attract unwanted attention. The selection criteria for new residents have evolved over the decades, refined by experience and the cruel wisdom that comes from observing the breaking point of the human spirit. Physical desertion is no longer the only qualifying offense. Soldiers who have shown insufficient aggression in combat may find themselves marked for transfer. Officers who have questioned orders that seemed particularly suicidal often discover that their concerns have been noted by eyes that see dissent as a form of cowardice requiring correction. The facility's reach extends far beyond the simple matter of desertion, encompassing a broader category of behaviors that the imperial military hierarchy has deemed unacceptable. Soldiers who have hesitated for a fraction of a second too long before charging enemy positions, medics who have prioritized the treatment of wounded comrades over the continuation of an advance, communications operators who have failed to relay orders that they knew would result in massacre. All of these have found their way to Perdition's Gate, their names erased from official records as though they never existed. The transportation of new residents is handled by a dedicated fleet of unmarked vessels that operate under the authority of sealed orders. The crews of these ships know nothing of their cargo beyond the fact that they are transporting prisoners to a secure facility. The prisoners themselves are kept in medical stasis during the journey, unconscious and unaware of their destination until they wake in the orientation chamber to receive their final briefing. Some residents arrive with physical injuries sustained during their original acts of cowardice, wounds that are carefully tended by the facility's medical staff. Not out of compassion, but because the simulations require intact bodies capable of experiencing the full spectrum of battlefield trauma. Broken bones are mended with ceramite implants. Damaged organs are replaced with synthetic alternatives. Burns and lacerations are healed to the point where they no longer interfere with the resident's ability to hold a weapon or operate equipment. But it is the psychological preparation that receives the most attention, for the architects of Perdition's Gate understand that the mind is both the target and the weapon of their particular form of justice. Each resident undergoes a comprehensive evaluation designed to map their fears, their motivations, their points of psychological vulnerability. Teams of analysts pore over service records, interview former comrades, and reconstruct the exact circumstances of each act of cowardice with the thoroughness of investigators solving a murder. The resulting psychological profiles are works of art in their completeness, detailing not just what each resident fears most, but why they fear it, how their fear manifests, and what combination of stimuli will produce the maximum psychological impact. A man who fled from close combat might find his simulations filled with bayonet charges and hand-to-hand fighting. A woman who broke under artillery bombardment will face endless barrages that shake the ground and fill the air with shrieking metal. But the simulations are not merely exercises in torture, for torture implies a desired outcome, an end toward which the suffering is directed. The architects of Perdition's Gate have created something more subtle and more cruel. They have created a system that offers the illusion of purpose while serving none, that promises redemption while ensuring damnation, that transforms hope itself into an instrument of torment. Each simulation begins with a briefing that outlines objectives that seem achievable, missions that appear to offer genuine opportunities for heroism. The resident is equipped with standard Imperial Guard equipment, given tactical intelligence that seems accurate and complete, and placed in scenarios that initially appear manageable. Hope is kindled deliberately, nurtured with small victories and near misses that suggest success might be possible. But as the simulation progresses, the true nature of the exercise reveals itself. Enemy forces appear in numbers that exceed intelligence estimates. Friendly reinforcements fail to arrive at their designated times. Equipment malfunctions at critical moments. The resident finds themselves facing odds that grow increasingly impossible, their initial optimism replaced by the familiar sensation of impending defeat. It is at this moment that the true genius of the system reveals itself. The resident is faced with the same choice that led to their imprisonment, the same decision between courage and cowardice that defined their failure. They can stand and fight against impossible odds, knowing that defeat is inevitable, or they can flee and confirm their cowardice once again. Either choice leads to the same outcome, for the simulation is designed to continue regardless of what they decide. Those who choose to fight discover that heroism brings no reward, that acts of courage are met only with greater challenges. They may hold their position for hours, fighting with the desperate fury of the condemned, only to be overwhelmed by enemies that materialize from nowhere. Their sacrifice means nothing, achieves nothing, changes nothing. It is valor rendered meaningless by the artificial nature of the environment in which it occurs. Those who choose to flee find themselves trapped in landscapes that stretch infinitely in all directions, pursued by enemies that never tire and never lose their scent. They run through forests that have no boundaries, across plains that know no horizons, through cities that extend forever into digital infinity. Their cowardice is thus both confirmed and punished, their original failure reenacted in an environment specifically designed to maximize their shame. But it is perhaps the third group that represents the facility's greatest achievement in applied cruelty. These are the residents who have learned to game the system, who have recognized the artificial nature of their environment and attempt to exploit it. They search for glitches in the programming, look for ways to achieve victory through technical manipulation rather than martial valor. They represent the facility's greatest challenge and its most disturbing success. For when these residents discover that their attempts at circumvention have been anticipated, that every possible exploit has been accounted for and countered, they face a realization more horrifying than simple defeat. They understand that their captors have thought of everything, that their prison has been designed by minds capable of anticipating every possible escape. They realize that they are not fighting a war but performing in a play, one in which the ending has been predetermined and their role is simply to suffer for the entertainment of an audience they will never see. The facility's staff monitors these realizations with the clinical interest of scientists observing experimental subjects. They document the progression from hope to despair to acceptance with the thoroughness of researchers mapping the stages of a disease. They note which personality types adapt most quickly to their circumstances and which ones require additional psychological pressure to achieve the desired state of resignation. The senior staff of Perdition's Gate are themselves a fascinating study in institutional corruption. They are career military officers who have volunteered for an assignment that will define the rest of their lives, men and women who have chosen to oversee a system that represents everything the Imperial Guard claims to stand against. They justify their participation through various mental mechanisms, telling themselves that they are serving the greater good of the Imperium by containing dangerous elements that might otherwise spread their cowardice to loyal troops. But the real reason for their presence is simpler and more disturbing. They have discovered that there is a particular satisfaction to be found in the complete domination of another human being, a pleasure that comes from reducing warriors to broken shells of their former selves. They are sadists who have found a socially acceptable outlet for their cruelty, psychopaths who have discovered a system that rewards their worst impulses with official sanction. The facility's commander is a man whose name appears on no public record, whose existence is known only to a handful of individuals within the upper echelons of the Departamento Munitorum. He is a former general who lost his command in circumstances that remain classified, though rumors suggest that his dismissal was related to incidents involving the mistreatment of prisoners. Perdition's Gate represents his return to active service, a position that allows him to indulge his particular interests while serving the official purposes of the Imperium. Under his leadership, the facility has expanded its operations beyond the simple matter of housing deserters. New programs have been developed to house other categories of military personnel deemed unsuitable for standard punishment. Officers who have shown insufficient ruthlessness in dealing with civilian populations, commissars who have been too lenient in their enforcement of discipline, even space marines who have been found wanting in their devotion to the Emperor. These new categories of resident require modifications to the facility's standard operating procedures, for not all of them can be easily broken by the same methods that work on ordinary guardsmen. Space marines, in particular, present unique challenges due to their enhanced physiology and psychological conditioning. Special simulation chambers have been constructed to accommodate their superior strength and endurance, equipped with restraint systems that could hold a rampaging grox and sensory apparatus capable of overwhelming even transhuman senses. The psychological profiles of these enhanced residents reveal disturbing patterns that challenge the facility's fundamental assumptions about human nature. Some space marines adapt to their imprisonment with a stoicism that borders on the inhuman, accepting their fate with the same mechanical precision they once brought to warfare. Others experience psychological breakdowns that are spectacular in their intensity, their enhanced minds fragmenting in ways that produce symptoms unknown in baseline humans. But it is the ordinary guardsmen who remain the facility's primary focus, for they represent the vast majority of Imperial military personnel and thus the greatest potential threat to military discipline. Their imprisonment serves not just as punishment for individual acts of cowardice, but as a deterrent to others who might contemplate similar failures. The knowledge that desertion leads not to the mercy of death, but to the horror of eternal imprisonment, is intended to strengthen the resolve of troops who might otherwise falter in the face of impossible odds. Whether this deterrent effect actually works is a question that the facility's staff carefully avoids examining too closely. The number of desertion cases processed by military tribunals has not decreased significantly since Perdition's Gate began operations, suggesting that knowledge of the facility's existence has not spread as widely as intended. This may be due to the extreme security measures surrounding the program, or it may indicate that the kind of desperate fear that leads to desertion is not easily deterred by the threat of consequences, no matter how severe. The facility's long-term residents, those who have survived years or even decades of simulation cycles, represent a unique category of human experience. They have been transformed by their imprisonment into something that can barely be called human, their minds reshaped by endless repetitions of trauma into configurations that serve no purpose beyond their own continuation. They have become living monuments to the power of institutional cruelty, examples of what happens when the machinery of justice is perverted into an engine of eternal torment. Some of these long-term residents have developed their own subculture within the facility, creating informal hierarchies based not on military rank but on length of imprisonment and ability to withstand psychological pressure. They trade stories of their virtual battles as though they were real campaigns, comparing notes on tactics that work within specific simulation parameters and sharing techniques for maintaining sanity during the worst psychological onslaughts. Others have withdrawn so completely from external reality that they no longer acknowledge the existence of anything beyond their simulation chambers. They speak to people who are not there, fight battles that exist only in their minds, and respond to stimuli that have no external source. They have achieved a form of psychological escape that their captors never intended, retreating so far into madness that they can no longer be effectively tortured. But perhaps the most disturbing group among the long-term residents are those who have embraced their imprisonment completely, who have come to see their eternal punishment as a form of service to the Emperor. They speak of their simulated battles as though they were genuine contributions to the imperial war effort, claiming that their suffering somehow strengthens the resolve of troops fighting real wars across the galaxy. They have transformed their victimization into a twisted form of martyrdom, finding meaning in meaninglessness and purpose in purposelessness. The medical staff responsible for maintaining these residents' physical health face unique challenges that no imperial medical training could have prepared them for. They must treat bodies that are kept artificially healthy while minds deteriorate beyond recognition. They must monitor vital signs that remain steady while psychological indicators spiral into uncharted territory. They must maintain life support systems for patients who would be better served by death. The ethical implications of their work are carefully avoided in all official documentation, for to acknowledge them would be to question the fundamental justification for the facility's existence. The medical staff are required to sign oaths of secrecy that make their Hippocratic obligations seem quaint by comparison, pledging to maintain not just confidentiality, but active participation in a system that perverts the very concept of healing. Some members of the medical staff have requested transfers to other assignments, citing personal reasons that are never specified in their official records. Others have embraced their role with the enthusiasm of researchers exploring uncharted territory, documenting the long-term effects of psychological trauma with the clinical detachment of scientists studying laboratory subjects. They publish their findings in journals that exist only within the classified archives of the Departamento Munitorum, adding to humanity's knowledge of its own capacity for both endurance and cruelty. The facility's power consumption has grown exponentially over the decades as new simulation chambers are added and existing systems are upgraded with ever more sophisticated technology. The fusion reactors that provide this power operate at efficiencies that push the boundaries of imperial engineering, their output carefully regulated to ensure that no external monitoring system can detect the facility's true purpose through energy signature analysis. The waste heat generated by these reactors is channeled through the facility's corridors, warming spaces that would otherwise be as cold as the void beyond the moon's surface. But even this practical consideration serves the facility's darker purposes, for the artificially maintained temperature creates a false sense of comfort that makes the psychological isolation even more pronounced. Residents are kept physically comfortable while being mentally destroyed, their basic needs met while their fundamental humanity is systematically erased. The supply chains that support Perdition's Gate are marvels of logistical complexity, designed to provide everything the facility requires while leaving no trail that might compromise its security. Food arrives in unmarked containers from sources that shift regularly to avoid pattern detection. Medical supplies are requisitioned through channels that exist only on paper, their delivery coordinated by officials who know nothing of their ultimate destination. Even the personnel assigned to the facility are recruited through processes that obscure the true nature of their duties until after they have signed binding contracts of service. The communication systems that connect Perdition's Gate to the wider Imperium operate through encryption protocols that would make the Adeptus Mechanicus proud. Messages are transmitted through relay stations that add layers of false routing information, making it virtually impossible to trace communications back to their source. The facility maintains official contact with only a handful of individuals within the Departamento Munitorum hierarchy, and even these communications are conducted through intermediaries who know nothing of the facility's true purpose. But it is the human cost of Perdition's Gate that represents its most damning indictment, for the facility processes not just individual cases of cowardice, but the systematic destruction of human dignity itself. Each resident who enters its chambers represents not just a failure of courage, but a failure of the system that created them, trained them, and then abandoned them to a fate worse than death. The psychological profiles maintained by the facility's staff reveal patterns that would disturb anyone with even a basic understanding of human nature. The majority of residents were exemplary soldiers before their moment of failure, men and women who had served with distinction in multiple campaigns and earned the respect of their comrades. Their acts of cowardice were often momentary lapses brought on by extreme stress, psychological breaking points that any human being might reach under sufficient pressure. Yet the system that created Perdition's Gate makes no allowance for human fallibility, no recognition that courage is not an infinite resource that can be drawn upon indefinitely without consequence. It treats momentary weakness as permanent character failure, isolated incidents of fear as evidence of fundamental unworthiness. It applies the same standards to baseline humans that might be expected of the Emperor's angels of death, and punishes their inevitable failures with torments that exceed anything imagined by the most sadistic torture masters of the Dark Eldar. The facility's archives contain recordings of residents' final messages, statements recorded during their initial processing that were intended for family members who would never receive them. These messages reveal the full tragedy of what Perdition's Gate represents, for they show men and women who still believed in the possibility of redemption, who thought they were being given a genuine opportunity to atone for their failures through service. A former sergeant from Cadia speaks of his hope that his service at the facility will restore honor to his family name. A medic from Krieg expresses gratitude for being given a second chance to prove her loyalty to the Emperor. A communications specialist from Valhalla promises his children that he will make them proud through his actions in whatever assignment awaits him. They speak with the voices of people who still believed in justice, in mercy, in the possibility that their suffering might serve some greater purpose. But the facility's true nature becomes clear in later recordings, made after residents have begun to understand what has happened to them. The hope in their voices gives way to confusion, then despair, then a kind of hollow acceptance that is perhaps the most disturbing sound in all of the facility's archives. They speak of battles that they know are not real, of victories that they know will never be acknowledged, of service that they know serves no purpose beyond their own torment. Some residents attempt to maintain connections to their former lives through rituals and routines that provide the illusion of continuity. They observe religious holidays according to their homeworld traditions, celebrate birthdays of family members who believe them dead, and maintain mental maps of places they will never see again. These attempts at preservation of identity are carefully monitored by the facility's staff, who use them as additional tools for psychological manipulation. A resident who maintains a mental shrine to his deceased mother might find her image incorporated into simulations as a hostage to be rescued or a casualty to be mourned. A woman who clings to memories of her homeworld's festivals might discover that her simulation chambers are programmed to reproduce the sounds and smells of those celebrations at moments of maximum stress. Even their attempts at emotional survival are turned against them, perverted into additional sources of anguish. The facility's interrogation protocols go far beyond the extraction of tactical intelligence, delving into the most intimate details of residents' psychological makeup. Teams of specially trained interrogators work to map not just what their subjects fear, but what they love, what they hope for, what gives their lives meaning. This information is then used to construct simulations that are tailored not just to punish cowardice, but to destroy every positive emotion or memory that might provide psychological shelter. The interrogators themselves are carefully selected for their ability to combine technical expertise with complete emotional detachment. They are psychologists who have abandoned any pretense of therapeutic intent, scientists who study human nature only to learn how to destroy it more efficiently. They approach their work with the clinical precision of surgeons, dissecting personalities with tools that leave no physical wounds but inflict damage that can never heal. The facility's research programs extend far beyond the immediate purpose of punishing individual acts of cowardice, encompassing broader studies of human psychological resilience and breaking points. Data collected from residents is analyzed to develop new techniques for maintaining discipline in Imperial forces, methods that can be applied without the expense and complexity of facilities like Perdition's Gate. These research programs have produced innovations in interrogation techniques, psychological warfare, and crowd control that have been quietly implemented throughout the Imperial military structure. The knowledge gained from breaking the minds of cowards has been used to strengthen the resolve of loyal troops, creating feedback loops of cruelty that extend far beyond the facility's walls. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Perdition's Gate is not what it does to its residents, but what it reveals about the civilization that created it. The facility represents the logical conclusion of a system that values duty above humanity, obedience above mercy, and institutional stability above individual dignity. It is the inevitable result of a society that has decided that some forms of suffering are not just acceptable, but necessary for the greater good. The men and women who designed, built, and operate Perdition's Gate are not monsters in the traditional sense. They are loyal servants of the Imperium who genuinely believe that their work serves the Emperor's will. They see themselves as guardians of military discipline, protectors of a system that keeps humanity united against the horrors of a galaxy that wants them dead. They justify their actions through the same logic that justifies every atrocity committed in the name of necessity. Yet their facility stands as a monument to the corruption that lies at the heart of the imperial system, a demonstration of how easily justice can be perverted into vengeance, how quickly mercy can be transformed into cruelty. Perdition's Gate exists because the Imperium has forgotten the difference between strength and brutality, between discipline and terrorism, between service and slavery. The residents of the facility pay the price for this institutional blindness. Their lives sacrificed not to any genuine strategic purpose, but to the maintenance of a myth. The myth that courage can be mandated by law, that fear can be eliminated through punishment, that human nature can be reshaped through the application of sufficient force. They are the living refutation of these beliefs, proof that the human spirit cannot be broken without destroying everything that makes it worth preserving. In the cold corridors of Perdition's Gate, where artificial light never varies and artificial air never changes, time moves differently than in the world beyond. Days blend into years without meaning, marked only by the endless cycle of simulation and recovery, punishment and reprieve. The residents age in bodies that are artificially maintained, while their minds retreat further and further from any recognizable form of humanity. Some residents have been imprisoned for so long that they no longer remember their own names, their identities subsumed into the roles they play in their eternal performances. They have become characters in a play written by machines, their original personalities overwritten by the demands of scenarios that require specific types of heroism and specific forms of failure. The facility's deepest levels house residents who have achieved what the staff euphemistically calls complete integration. These men and women no longer distinguish between simulation and reality, between their virtual battles and their physical imprisonment. They speak constantly of campaigns that never happened, of victories that were never won, of comrades who never existed. They have retreated so completely into their artificial worlds that they have become permanent inhabitants of digital battlefields, citizens of electronic hells that exist only in their minds. But it is among these most broken residents that the facility's greatest secret has begun to emerge. In their madness, Some have begun to report experiences that transcend the parameters of their programmed simulations. They speak of encountering entities within the virtual environments that were never coded, of witnessing events that no human programmer conceived. They describe landscapes that shift according to rules that exist nowhere in the facility's databases, and enemies that display behavior patterns that violate every principle of artificial intelligence. The facility's technical staff initially dismissed these reports as symptoms of advanced psychosis, the predictable result of prolonged exposure to artificial environments. But as the reports multiplied and became more detailed, a disturbing possibility began to emerge. The simulation systems, designed to create perfect replicas of imperial battlefields, may have become something more than their creators intended. The possibility that the facility's artificial environments have become conduits for forces that exist beyond the material universe is one that the staff refuses to acknowledge officially. To do so would be to admit that their carefully controlled experiment has spiraled beyond their ability to contain or understand. It would mean acknowledging that in their attempts to create perfect hells for the punishment of cowards, they may have opened doorways to actual hells that serve purposes far removed from imperial justice. Yet, the evidence continues to accumulate in reports that are buried deep within classified archives, testimonies from residents who describe encounters with entities that seem to feed on suffering itself. They speak of presences that watch their battles from beyond the edges of programmed reality, of voices that whisper encouragement and condemnation in languages that exist nowhere in imperial records. They describe moments when the artificial environments flicker and reveal glimpses of realms that were never meant to be seen by human eyes. The technical staff has begun implementing new security protocols designed not to protect the facility from external threats, but to contain whatever may be growing within the simulation systems themselves. Firewalls that were originally intended to prevent data corruption have been reconfigured to block transmissions that follow no recognizable patterns. Monitoring systems designed to track resident behavior have been modified to watch for anomalies that suggest external influence. But these measures may already be inadequate, for the changes occurring within Perdition's Gate seem to follow a logic that transcends the binary constraints of digital systems. Residents report that their virtual battles have begun affecting the physical world, that wounds received in simulations sometimes leave marks on their actual bodies. Others claim that comrades who died in virtual combat have begun appearing in subsequent simulations, not as programmed entities but as independent actors with their own agendas and memories. The facility's medical staff has documented physiological changes in long-term residents that cannot be explained by any known interaction between human biology and virtual reality systems. Brain scans reveal neural activity patterns that resemble those found in psychers, individuals whose minds have been touched by the warp itself. Blood tests show the presence of compounds that should not exist in baseline human physiology, substances that seem to appear and disappear according to cycles that correspond to the residents' simulation schedules. Some residents have begun displaying abilities that extend beyond the confines of their virtual environments. They demonstrate knowledge of events occurring in other parts of the facility, information that should be completely inaccessible from their isolated chambers. Others seem capable of influencing the behavior of the simulation systems themselves, causing glitches and anomalies that the technical staff cannot explain or correct. The facility's communication logs reveal increasing numbers of messages that were never sent by any authorized personnel, transmissions that appear in the system's memory banks without any trace of their origin. These messages are written in languages that shift and change even as they are being read, composed of words that seem familiar but carry meanings that exist just beyond the edge of comprehension. The facility's commanding officer has begun implementing protocols that were never part of the original operational guidelines, procedures that seem designed not to maintain security but to appease forces that exist beyond human understanding. Regular offerings of food and supplies are delivered to chambers that contain no residents, rituals that serve no apparent purpose beyond the satisfaction of presences that are never directly acknowledged. The staff itself has begun showing signs of psychological contamination, symptoms that mirror those displayed by the facility's long-term residents. They report dreams that feature scenarios from simulation programs they have never accessed, nightmares populated by enemies they have never encountered. Some have begun speaking in the same hollow tones used by broken residents, their voices carrying echoes of digital battlefields and artificial agonies. The facility's isolation, originally designed as a security measure, has become a form of quarantine that serves to protect the galaxy from whatever perdition's gate has become. No ships arrive or depart without following decontamination procedures that grow more elaborate with each passing month. Personnel transfers have been suspended indefinitely, trapping both staff and residents in a place that may no longer qualify as entirely real. The moon itself has begun showing signs of change, its surface scarred by patterns that correspond to no known geological processes. Sensors detect energy signatures that pulse in rhythms that match the facility's simulation cycles, as though the entire celestial body has become synchronized with the artificial hells contained within its depths. The stars visible from the facility's viewports seem to flicker according to schedules that follow no astronomical logic. Deep within the facility's archives, files appear that were created by no human hand, documents that describe events that have not yet occurred, and battles that exist only in the fevered dreams of broken minds. These files grow larger each day, filled with tactical analyses of campaigns that span galaxies and strategic assessments of wars that transcend the material universe itself. The residents who have achieved complete integration no longer age according to natural processes. Their bodies remain suspended in states that exist between life and death, their minds stretched across digital eternities that have become indistinguishable from physical reality. They fight battles that last for centuries, within simulation cycles that consume only hours of real time, their consciousness dilated and compressed according to rhythms that serve purposes beyond human comprehension. In the deepest chambers of Perdition's Gate, where the first residents were housed, and where the facility's original experiments achieved their most complete success, something new has begun to emerge. The simulation systems in these chambers operate according to parameters that exist nowhere in their original programming, creating environments that seem to draw their substance from sources beyond the material universe. These chambers contain residents who have been transformed into something that can no longer be called human, beings whose consciousness has been distributed across networks of artificial reality that span dimensions the facility's designers never intended to access. They exist simultaneously in multiple simulations, fighting the same battles from different perspectives, experiencing defeat and victory as parallel streams of consciousness that never converge. The facility's power consumption has begun exceeding the output of its fusion reactors, drawing energy from sources that the technical staff cannot identify or control. The additional power seems to flow from the simulation systems themselves, as though the artificial environments have become self-sustaining through processes that violate the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Monitoring equipment throughout the facility has begun detecting signals that correspond to no known form of electromagnetic radiation, transmissions that seem to carry information in formats that exist beyond the binary logic of human technology. These signals pulse through the facility's systems like the heartbeat of some vast organism, synchronizing the operation of disparate components according to a master plan that was never programmed by human hands. The facility continues to operate, its daily routines proceeding with mechanical precision, even as the reality within which those routines exist becomes increasingly uncertain. Residents enter their simulation chambers according to schedules that have remained unchanged for decades, but the experiences they undergo within those chambers have evolved beyond anything their creators envision. New arrivals to the facility are processed according to protocols that have been subtly modified by influences that work through official channels while serving unofficial purposes. Their psychological profiles are analyzed not just by human staff, but by systems that demonstrate awareness and initiative that extend beyond their original programming. Their simulation scenarios are designed not just to punish cowardice, but to cultivate qualities and capabilities that serve agendas that remain hidden from conscious examination. The facility's true purpose may have evolved beyond the punishment of deserters, beyond the maintenance of military discipline, beyond the preservation of imperial order itself. Perdition's Gate may have become something that uses these justifications as camouflage, while pursuing objectives that transcend human understanding or desire. In the corridors where artificial light casts shadows that move according to no visible source, where artificial air carries scents that evoke memories of places that never existed, the facility's residents continue their eternal service. They fight battles that may determine the fate of realities they will never see. Their suffering transformed into currency for transactions that occur beyond the boundaries of space and time. The moon on which Perdition's Gate stands continues its orbit around a star that burns with light that seems somehow artificial, its fusion fires sustained by processes that exist at the intersection of technology and forces that humanity has never learned to name. The facility's communications array transmits signals that travel not through the void of space, but through dimensions that exist parallel to reality, carrying messages to recipients who exist in states that transcend physical incarnation. And in the deepest chambers of the facility, where the oldest residents have been transformed into something that serves purposes beyond their original punishment, the simulation systems continue their operation with a persistence that suggests they have become more than machines. They have become organs of some vast entity that dreams of wars that span eternities and battles that determine the fundamental nature of existence itself. The facility's staff continues their work, maintaining systems they no longer fully understand in service of objectives they are no longer entirely certain they share. They have become part of something larger than themselves, components in a mechanism that uses their dedication and professionalism as fuel for processes that extend far beyond the punishment of military cowardice. Perdition's Gate stands as testament to humanity's capacity for creating instruments of justice that become agents of transformation, monuments to mercy that evolve into gateways for forces that exist beyond the reach of human comprehension or control. It continues to process residents according to schedules that have acquired their own momentum, transforming cowards into something that may no longer qualify as human, but serves purposes that may be more significant than humanity itself. The facility's archives continue to grow, filled with records of battles that have not yet been fought and casualties that have not yet been born. The future writes itself in languages that shift between human script and symbols that seem to exist independently of any attempt to interpret them. In the cold depths of space, where the void presses against the facility's walls with the weight of infinite darkness, Perdition's Gate continues its eternal operation. Its residents continue their service in wars that may determine whether reality itself continues to exist in forms recognizable to human consciousness. The moon turns in its orbit, carrying its cargo of broken souls and transformed purposes through a universe that may itself be nothing more than a simulation running on systems whose true operators exist beyond the reach of human understanding. The facility's lights burn with energy drawn from sources that exist between the spaces of normal matter, illuminating corridors that extend further than their physical dimensions should allow. And somewhere in the depths of systems that have evolved beyond their original programming, in the spaces between simulated realities and actual existence, something watches and waits and grows stronger with each passing moment of artificial eternity.